In the summer of 1994, Officer James Prescott received a call for a welfare check in the small, quiet village of Blackwood. Neighbors had reported hearing unsettling cries and strange noises coming from a dilapidated house at the end of a long, narrow lane. The house had been abandoned for years, they said, but tonight something was different. The house was a local legend, a place people avoided after dark. Stories had circulated about a tragedy that occurred years ago. A man had murdered his wife and child in the attic before taking his own life. Since then, the house had stood empty, slowly decaying as nature crept back in. Most people dismissed the stories as small-town folklore, but tonight, the neighbors' fear felt palpable. James wasn't one for ghost stories. He'd been on the force long enough to know that strange sounds in the night could usually be explained away by animals or the shifting of an old house. Still, as he pulled up to the house, something about the scene made him uneasy. The house seemed to loom out of the darkness, its broken windows and sagging roofline giving it a sinister air. A soft breeze carried the faintest hint of decay and dampness, sending a chill down his spine despite the summer warmth. As he approached the front door, he could hear it, a faint sound coming from inside. It was like crying, distant and muffled. James knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The sound continued, a soft, heart-wrenching sob that seemed to echo through the walls. He tried the door, and to his surprise, it swung open with a loud creak. Inside, the air was unnaturally cold, and the smell of mildew was stronger. Dust particles floated in the dim light from his flashlight, and the wooden floorboards groaned under his weight as he stepped inside. "Hello," James called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. No answer. He began his search, moving cautiously through the downstairs rooms. They were empty, filled only with forgotten furniture, covered in white sheets, like ghosts of the past lingering in the space. The crying persisted, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Every time James thought he was getting closer, the sound seemed to move, slipping further away from his grasp. A shiver of unease crawled up his spine as he realized something strange. No matter where he went in the house, the temperature never rose. It remained frigid, as if the place was stuck in the depths of winter. Even stranger, he could see his breath in front of him, the icy vapor swirling in the dim light. Eventually, he found himself standing at the base of the narrow staircase that led to the attic. The crying was louder now, almost desperate. James hesitated, every instinct telling him to turn back, but his training pushed him forward. The stairs creaked under his weight as he ascended, each step more difficult than the last, as though something unseen was pulling him back. When he reached the attic door, his hand hovered over the knob. The crying had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He opened the door slowly, the hinges protesting with a loud groan. Inside, the attic was empty, save for a few old boxes and broken furniture. Dust covered everything in a thick layer, undisturbed for years. But the moment James stepped inside, the air grew colder still. His skin prickled, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly afraid. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the walls. James spun around, his heart pounding. He rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. He tried again, jiggling the handle, but it was as if the door had been locked from the outside. Panic set in, and James pounded on the door, shouting for help, but his voice seemed to die in the thick, oppressive air. Then he felt it, a presence in the room with him. He turned slowly, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. In the far corner of the attic, standing motionless, was a figure. It was a man, his clothes tattered and covered in dust, his face gaunt and lifeless. His eyes were hollow, empty pits, and his skin was ashen, as though he had been buried and left to decay. The figure said nothing, but James could feel the weight of its gaze on him, as if it was staring straight through him. The air grew colder still, and James felt a deep, bone-chilling dread settle over him. He could barely move, frozen in place by fear. The man took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. James tried to back away, but the room seemed to close in around him. His heart raced, and his vision blurred as the figure advanced, inch by inch. The low sound of knocking filled the room again, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everywhere at once. It grew louder and louder, until it was a deafening cacophony that rattled his bones. Just as the figure was inches away, reaching out with a skeletal hand, the attic door flew open. James stumbled out, gasping for breath, his body shaking uncontrollably. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He rushed down the stairs, through the house, and out into the night, never stopping until he was safely outside. The cold air outside felt like a blessing, and James inhaled deeply, trying to calm his racing heart. He glanced back at the house, now silent and still, but the sense of being watched never left him. James never told anyone what really happened that night. He doubted they would believe him. But every time he closed his eyes, he could still see that figure, standing in the attic, watching him with those hollow, empty eyes.